Is it time to panic, or should we continue to exercise patience through 3 weeks of fantasy football? We will be discussing that exactly on today's episode. We've got a lot of stud names, 9 different players for you all. If you're watching on YouTube, you can already see who the first player is. Anthony Richardson. We have to start talking about him because he has been extremely disappointing through the first 3 weeks of the season. He had a strong week 1, but the last 2 weeks have not been pretty. Cameron, where do you fall on the panic meter with Anthony Richardson?
I'm starting to get closer to actually what's on our screen, closer to that 65%. And it's because we didn't believe that the passing floor could be as low as it has been for Anthony Richardson. And he's really shown over the last 2 weeks that, hey, you know what? There could be multiple games where I'm 10 to 20 for 167 yards and 2 interceptions, and that's it. And he just has really struggled when he's been pressured. He's 7 of 18 when facing a pressure right now. It's under 50% completion percentage for 114 yards, 1 touchdown and 2 picks. And then he gets the Steelers next week. So it's just like, hasn't been great. Now he's going to face one of the hottest defenses in the NFL this next week. So I am starting to get a little bit panicked on Anthony Richardson.
Yeah, you mentioned the panic meter on the screen over on YouTube is sitting right around that 65% mark. That is reflective of where I am at with Anthony Richardson. But Ty, what about you? Where are you at on the panic meter?
Yeah, I'm at that 60% range as well. Because on top of how bad the passing production has been, we just have not been seeing it on the ground from the guy. Last week, he had 8 carries for 24 yards. He only has 1 rushing touchdown on the year. Like, it has not been great. And you look at all the turnovers that he's been making too. 2 of these interceptions, one was on his receiver because he slipped, and the second one was the end of the game Hail Mary against Green Bay. So I'm going to cut those out. But like the 4 other interceptions that he's made are horrible. Like, they are like him trying to be a quarterback that he isn't supposed to be, or that he is not just yet. So I really hope that we can just chalk up these past 2 games to the inexperience of Richardson, that we are just kind of going through the growing pains right now. But the fact is, with the rushing production not hitting right now and the passing production being as low as it is, it's just a double whammy that is just really unfortunate.
Yeah, the non-rushing factor is what's absolutely brutal here, because we're all envisioning this perfect world where, Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor would balance themselves out perfectly, where, Jonathan Taylor probably wouldn't be this upper echelon fantasy option, still a top 10 guy, but, not a top 5 guy like he has been this year. And that Anthony Richardson would still get plenty of rush attempts, would still get plenty of opportunity around the goal line. Fact of the matter is that's just not happening. So when you remove the rushing upside from Anthony Richardson, right, it's the inverse of what Josh Norris of Underdog Fantasy always says, right? Your rushing is the floor and the passing is the upside. Well, we're not even getting rushing, which is the biggest issue here. So you're really dependent on the arm of Anthony Richardson for fantasy points, and we have not been getting that. Would you consider buying low on Anthony Richardson right now? Do you think there's room for a comeback here? Cameron, I'll start with you.
I think you can. I'd be worried about doing it. Like, I don't think I could trade a starting quarterback to go buy a low. I think if you have, if you could swing a Justin Fields plus for Anthony Richardson, maybe, someone sees him like that. But on the year right now, Anthony Richardson has the same amount of rush attempts as Bo Nix for only 10 more rushing yards and 1 less rushing touchdown. He has the same rushing stats as Bo Nix right now. It's gross, and we know the upside. It's just, I'm not giving up a lot to go buy low on Anthony Richardson right now.
Oh, that is a disgusting stat of Bo. Golly, and I'm the biggest anti-Bo Nix person there is out there. Ty, what about you? Are you thinking about swinging a buy low trade for Anthony Richardson at all?
I mean, I think if you've got one of like Derek Carr or Geno Smith, but I don't know if the person that has anything Anthony Richardson would want to take on those kind of quarterbacks in place of Richardson, because again, if Indy self-corrects, or they figure this out, Richardson still has that top 5 ceiling, right? Like that was the intrigue for Richardson going into the season, and it's still there. It's just hard to see right now because of just how bad it's been.
I'm somewhat interested in acquiring Anthony Richardson because I believe we still have a long season ahead of us and that they can recorrect. It's a terrifying move to make, though. And it is definitely like putting your chips on the table and being willing to play. Now, I totally get it. People don't want to play that game. If I'm in need of a quarterback, though, this is the time of the year where I'm willing to go scoop up an Anthony Richardson at a discount potentially. Because what do I have to lose at this point? I get I can bounce back from 0-3. But if I'm already struggling at quarterback, I may as well take a shot on a guy who has the opportunity to potentially break fantasy football. Before we move on to the next player, though, I got to talk to you freeloaders out there. Yes, I'm looking at you, the 93% that haven't yet subscribed to our channel, but still watch our content, which we're grateful for. I saw a comment on our last video that someone literally subscribed because I called them a freeloader. So we're running it back again. Look, we're going to change that really quick. Appreciate your support of our work. All you got to do is like turn that wrist probably like 45 degrees and you'll be hovering right over that subscribe button. You click on that, you'll subscribe to our channel, you turn on the notifications as well. You'll be alerted when all of our newest content is out. If you're listening to the audio feed as well, leave us a nice little review over there. Helps us out tremendously, and we love to hear what you think of the show as well, how we can continue to make improvements. So make sure you subscribe, leave a nice little comment or review over there as well. We appreciate your continued support of our work. Let's move on to a new entire offense, fellas. An offense that I think we have a lot of questions on. We had a lot of questions going into this week, but let's talk about the Miami Dolphins. Because we have Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle, who did not perform well this past week with Skylar Thompson under center, which doesn't really surprise anybody. But how panicked are we about these two Miami Dolphins pass catchers? And Cameron, I'll start with you.
Tyreek, I think, is good enough where I would leave him in your starting lineup no matter who's out there. I think he's a guy that's always going to command targets. I think that he's a guy that they're going to find ways to put the ball in his hands because he's so dynamic, maybe the most dynamic football player in the entire NFL still. But it's just, I watched Skylar Thompson. I watched all of his pass attempts, and he might not even play in this next game, depending on how severe the injury is. But he is a one read, and if he gets any pressure in his face, he's either just chucking it up or taking the sack. And that's it. And that's what you're dealing with because Miami's decided, hey, we're not dealing with quarterback position for at least the next 3 weeks, probably more. So Tyreek Hill is definitely not an elite option anymore. But I think he's a good enough football player that you leave him in your starting lineup.
Yeah, where would you place yourself on the panic meter? Because right now on the screen over on YouTube, he's sitting right around that like 35 to 40% mark. And I think the only reason why I'm not more panicked is because Tyreek Hill is, like you said, way too good of a football player to overreact on. Obviously, you have to react dramatically here because it's Skylar Thompson, right? The quarterback play isn't great, but where would you put yourself?
Yeah, I would probably put myself around that 25-30% mark. Just knowing, Tyreek Hill's had a season with 1,700 yards on the Dolphins where Thompson played multiple games. When Tua missed an injury or missed with a concussion two years ago. However, if we find out Tua's out for the next 8 weeks, I think I start growing a little bit more because I don't want a very extended Skylar Thompson quarterback reign in Miami for Tyreek Hill's fantasy upside.
I'll transition to you, Ty, and ask the same question. Where do you place yourself on the panic meter and why?
I'm probably closer to like 20%. Like it stinks. It sucks because again, it's just not going to be as good. But this is kind of the same. I see it similarly to what we were saying about Jamar Chase in week 1, right? No preseason action, but you don't want to be the guy that sat Jamar Chase, right? When he goes off for 20. Tyreek Hill still has that same kind of, I'll call it optimism. Like he can still give you 20, 25 on a week. And especially when you look at their next games with Tennessee, New England, and in Indianapolis, like the New England matchup is probably going to be a little stingy, but there are some favorable matchups up ahead. So I'm not fully panicked on a guy like Tyreek Hill, but if I may, the other Dolphins wide receiver, I do not share the same sentiment.
Yeah, let's transition to Jaylen Waddle because I don't either. I am much more panicked on Jaylen Waddle than I am Tyreek Hill, and not because he had a worse day. He only had a worse day by 0.4 fantasy points. This is just a matter of whoever they bring in is probably going to look Tyreek Hill's way. And like you said, Cameron, it's going to be a one read and dump kind of situation, I fear. And I just don't think we're going to see many more weeks where Jaylen Waddle just, volumes his way to being a top 20 wide receiver. But Ty, I'll come back to you because you wanted to transition right away into Jaylen Waddle here, so you don't share the same sentiment. The panic meter currently over on YouTube sitting right around the 65% mark. Where are you at?
I would say I'm probably like 50% because when we're looking at the short term, right, of just Skylar Thompson, Tyler Huntley, or Tim Boyle, like, yeah, it's not great, right? But your hope for a guy like Jaylen Waddle is that either Tua comes back after, the Indy game, because that would be 4 weeks on the IR, or they bring in another quarterback that is an upgrade over any of the three that they have on the roster right now. Because if that happens, then there's some optimism there for Jaylen Waddle. So I give it a 50% because I think it's one of two things. If it's any of the quarterbacks playing on the roster right now, it's not great for the guy. But if they bring in an upgrade, there is some intrigue then.
Cameron, what about you? Where are you at on the panic meter?
I'm probably closer to 55, 60%. And it's just when I think about this team and I think about dynamic playmakers who they're going to make sure they get the ball in their hand, Jaylen Waddle's third. He's behind Tyreek and he's behind Achane.
Yep.
And it's scary, or it's crazy to think, because you put Waddle on 25 other teams, he's the dynamic playmaker you get the ball in their hands
Right.
of. But because this is Miami and who they have and the speed they have on this team, he's number 3. And if I knew Tua was going to be back 4 weeks from now, if he was only going to miss these next 3 weeks, then 100%, then I'm not as panicked. But we don't know that. It's just so up in the air with Tua that if this goes on for 6, 7, 8 weeks, I'm really, really worried about Jaylen Waddle.
Is there a world where Mike McDaniel finds a way to simplify this offense where all that's going to be is crossers over the middle that Skylar Thompson or whoever the backup quarterback is going to be? I pray to God it's not Tim Boyle again, but if whoever the backup quarterback is, he just simplifies it where it's just crossing routes and rhythm throws that don't take much. How do I want not take much practice? Is there a world where Mike McDaniel just simplifies this offense to a point where let's just get the ball and not make it hard for Jaylen Waddle and Tyreek Hill to get to work?
I think that's what he's going to have to do. I think getting Raheem Mostert back is going to be big for this offense because you can really rely more on the run game. I think they're okay every once in a while giving Achane 20 plus, rush attempts in a game. But I think as a long-term plan, they realize, hey, we don't want this guy injured if we are making the playoffs this year. So we can't just continuously feed him 20 plus touches, where when you get Mostert back, you can. And then it really, I think, opens up the rest of this offense.
So the Miami Dolphins were not too incredibly optimistic on, again, Tyreek Hill is just such a good player where you can't overreact. But Waddle is the one we have a little bit more concern on, though that could always fluctuate depending on what news we get around Tua Tagovailoa here. Hopefully in the next week or so we can start forming some more solidified opinions here. But let's move on to the Houston Texans now. Let's talk about Tank Dell. He's just been a very confusing player to try and manage this season because on the one hand, you were disappointed through the first 2 weeks. You got 11.5 out of him this last week, 11.2 exactly. I have him at the panic meter dead at 50% because you drafted him as the third option in this offense. He finishes the wide receiver 34 this week. Before Monday Night Football, I should add. We're recording before Monday Night Football. In some ways, I'm not surprised the way the cookie is crumbling. At the same time, though, I get a lot of people are probably thinking, well, the dude has so much upside and so many people were still optimistic after week 1. Where is my explosive performance? I think at the end of the day, we're seeing, well, Tank Dell might actually be, 2.5 with Stephon Diggs on this offense. And some weeks it's going to be Stephon Diggs, as it was last week where he drew 12 targets and caught 9 of them. And Tank Dell still had a fine game, but clearly took a seat behind Stephon Diggs in this game. So, Ty, I'll come back to you, and I'll start with you here. Where are you at with Tank Dell?
I am more concerned than you are. Like, I would put myself probably in that like 60 to 65 range for Tank, because to me, it seems like the only path for Tank to be trusted to put him into your lineup and keep him there week in, week out is if Nico Collins' kind of alpha streak that he's on right now slows down, and that's not happening at any point. And then when Joe Mixon comes back too from his ankle injury, he's going to get the ball too. So that's even less opportunities than for a guy like Tank Dell. And again, just through 3 weeks, Tank Dell now is officially third in snaps and routes run of the 3 wide receivers on this team. And he's got less than a yard per route run at 0.94. Like, Tank has not shown you anything to trust him in your lineup. So maybe 60 to 65 is a little harsh, but this is one of those, like, until further notice, like, I don't know why you would trust Tank Dell.
See, we were talking about this before, like this morning, before we created the agenda even. And I was like, I mean, we could talk about Tank Dell. I also just think this was like a built-in fear all along. Like, he was being drafted as a third option on this team. And there is a reality that the floor falls off from underneath. But I'm also not panicked because this offense is good enough at the same time. I mean, did they just get dog walked by the Minnesota Vikings? Yeah, I mean, CJ Stroud threw 2 picks. It wasn't great. It wasn't great, Bob. But I think there's a world where Tank Dell can still give you a handful of explosive weeks. We're only 3 weeks in. I think we're still learning a lot about this Houston Texans offense. Cameron, where do you lie?
I'm less panicked than you. So I'm actually a little more on the other side. I went back and watched all of Tank's targets throughout the season so far, and he is strictly running late breaking routes. That's something that we kind of knew coming in, that you're going to use him a little more down the field. And this Texans offensive line has struggled a lot. And that's really thrown off the timing between Stroud and Tank Dell. There was 3 or 4 targets he's had already this season that they're just a little bit off, him and Stroud, where if Stroud throws the ball a teeny bit earlier, teeny bit, closer to the chest, we're looking at Tank Dell with 100 more receiving yards so far on the season. He's also the guy that Stroud likes to look for in those broken plays. But against Minnesota, if there was a broken play where Stroud's rushing around, they got to him so quickly that he just didn't have those same opportunities. So it's going to be real dependent on how this offensive line can hold up. I think that they're going to start connecting a little bit more. My worry is just we're going to have to wait 3 or 4 weeks before we get that real big boom week. And by then, everybody's just like, I'm not starting Dell and he's on your bench. So I think he's going to be fine as the season goes on. I think it might just take a little bit to gel with the addition of Diggs in this offense.
And I think there's validity to both sides that you two brought up, which is why I think I find myself right in the middle of, like, on the one hand, yeah, he's behind Nico and Diggs at this point. But on the other hand, I think there's still going to be plenty of opportunity for him once this offense finally gets in sync, once this offense figures out how are we going to incorporate these 3 incredible weapons that we have, and we get our offensive line solidified here as well and get them playing as a more solidified as a unit. We have 5 more names we're going to talk about after the break. So let's take a quick break. We'll be right back. Today's podcast episode is brought to you by our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. Now, we love Underdog. It is the easiest place to play best ball formats, and they even have their own form of player props called Pick'em. You can make up to 20 times your money on a single night by correlating props together. 2 picks will triple your money, 3 will 6 times it, 4 will 10 times it, and 5 plays that all hit will multiply your entry by 20. You can even place insurance on your picks too, so if only 4 of your 5 props hit, you still get 10 times your entry. And if you use our code FELLAS when signing up, Underdog is going to double your first deposit up to $100. Alrighty, we are back. We have discussed Anthony Richardson, Tyreek Hill, Jaylen Waddle, and Tank Dell. We're going to move on to another pair of teammates now. Fellas, let's start with Mike Evans, who has had a down couple of weeks here after putting up a phenomenal week 1. Now, had Denver last week, was playing from behind the whole game. You'd like to think that would favor Mike Evans. I'm just going to say I'm willing to write week 3 away due to the Pat Surtain treatment. That dude has been locks this year. He has been phenomenal. He has shut down DK Metcalf. He has shut down George. People were trying to say like, oh, George Pickens was a penalty away from actually burning Pat Surtain. Cool, one play, right? Like Pat Surtain isn't going to be, he isn't going to be locked down the entire year. He's not going to shut everybody down to a T. But I'm willing to say, you know what, Pat Surtain, pretty dang good. That's why Mike Evans struggled in week 3. So on the panic meter, I'm sitting right around 30-ish, 35%. I don't like seeing back-to-back down weeks, but I also know how good Mike Evans is still. So Cameron, where do you lie? How panicked are you?
I'm probably 35-ish%. I know we talked about at the beginning of the year that we were all in on Chris Godwin, but Godwin's been better these first 3 weeks than I think any of us three thought he was going to be. The dude is averaging 7 receptions for 80 yards and a touchdown each week. Like that is a phenomenal start, over 21 fantasy points per game. And I think because of that, Mike Evans has taken a little bit of a back seat. I do worry a little bit about the lack of targets, only seeing 6 as his most targets, so far this season.
Right.
So that is probably why I'm a little farther, a little 35, almost 40% on the panic meter. But I think that he's still a good enough player, and Baker's been playing well enough that he'll still have some of those boom weeks that'll keep him probably in that wide receiver 2 range around the end of the season.
Ty, what about you? I know the volume has been a little bit concerning for me, but we've also never seen Mike Evans be a massive volume hog. Maybe in the days of Tom Brady, when he was drawing 8, 9, 10 targets a game. But we've seen seasons where Mike Evans has 115 targets, and that's just what he ends up being. But he catches 10 touchdowns along the way. I haven't quite seen that here the last 2 weeks. There's obviously a lot of room for rebound here, right?
There is, but I do want to just highlight that this year, it seems like Mike Evans is being utilized very differently than years past. And you can just take a look at just his depth of target. His career depth of target is 15 yards. This year so far, it's down to 11.4, so nearly 3.5 yards less. Now, that's not to say that he's not going to continue being a red zone threat or that he won't see more go balls in the future, because again, this is just 3 weeks into the season. I just think that the lack of Mike Evans so far this season, again, is mainly because of Chris Godwin, right? And you look at their upcoming games, you got Philly, you got Atlanta, you got New Orleans, you got Baltimore, Atlanta, Kansas City, San Francisco. So he's got a gauntlet of a schedule coming up here. Now, on the chance, can he find the end zone? Yes, it's Mike Evans. That being said, though, the lack of volume does make me a little concerned that going into these kind of matchups, we might continue to see more of what we saw in week 2 than this past week, right? When you've got Pat Surtain shadowing you pretty much the entire game on all but 10 snaps.
Yeah, the reality of Chris Godwin becoming the better fantasy asset than Mike Evans, like Cameron, you said it at the top, it happened a lot sooner than we all thought, which I do wonder if that's the rhythm this offense is going to be clicking in, how much that continues to impact Mike Evans. Does it continue to spiral downward, or does it have an opportunity to bounce back? Where did you mention where you were at on the panic meter?
I would be closer to like 35-40%, just because again, the volume isn't there, but because you don't want to call Mike Evans the touchdown dependent wide receiver.
We've all been burned on that the last few years,
Right.
right? Like everybody has said, oh, he's touchdown dependent. It's got to go away at some point. It's like, okay, well, watch, Mike Evans is going to put up 12 touchdowns again this year, but go ahead, continue.
No, I just think like you know what you're getting with Mike Evans at this point. So to expect really anything else from Mike Evans is foolish. That sounds harsh, but it's foolish.
Right. Mike Evans isn't going to be this 12, 13, 14 target per game kind of player, especially when you have Chris Godwin, who's soaking up a lot of those targets from the slot now as well. The other player we're going to talk about is obviously not Chris Godwin, because he has been phenomenal this year. It is running back Rachaad White, who I am every week. Again, we talked about him last week. I'm like, now there's an opportunity, bounces back. He plays the Broncos this week. I'm sorry, you can't rush for 6 times for 17 yards against the Denver Broncos and expect me not to shoot all the way up on the panic meter. I am sitting right around a 70, 65, 70% on the panic meter. And the more I sit here and think about Rachaad White, I'm probably closer to a 75% actually, because you factor in the reality of Bucky Irving as well. I mean, he is going to be one of the most popular waiver wire ads this week. And he's already been a popular waiver wire ad this year if you haven't added him already. There's some room for saving grace here with Rachaad White, but man, just another lackluster, disappointing week. Cameron, how panicked are you?
I'm probably in the same spot. I mean, when you average 2.1, 1.8, and 2.8 yards per attempt in your first 3 games, and you got a guy who's averaging close to 6 yards per attempt behind you, you got to pick it up pretty quick or you're going to be gone. You're going to lose that starting job. And we talked before this because I was watching the film a little bit and I said something to you guys. It was dreadful this last week. He had multiple rush attempts where he just runs into the back of his lineman and just falls over. It was not a good look at all for Rachaad White. Obviously, the receiving game is going to be his saving grace, like you said. He's got a little bit of that. 6 targets in 2 games so far this season. I think that keeps up. But if the rushing game is as bad as it has been, that the receiving game is both his floor and his ceiling. That's all he's got. He's not going to get anything on the ground. So he's going to be a touchdown dependent receiving back pretty much is what he's turned into. And that is not what you want for a guy you drafted as a running back 14 or 15.
Well, what you put in our group chat earlier today that Rachaad White didn't have he only had 1 rushing attempt in the second half, and Bucky Irving handled the rest of the work. Is that
0 in the second half? 0 rush attempts in the second half.
And meanwhile, you see Bucky Irving rack up a handful of carries for 50 plus yards on the day. Ty, where are you at on the panic meter?
Yep, right there with you guys. That schedule that I just brought up for Mike Evans. Those are the same defenses that are all bottom 12 in fantasy points allowed to running backs this year. And so if we thought Mike Evans had a gauntlet, Rachaad White has a gauntlet. And I kind of gave him a nickname in conversation earlier. Is Rachaad White just not a glorified Alexander Madison? Like,
oh no. No.
The dude he does not have good vision. There are plenty of times where the dude just needs to cut it back inside, but nope, he tries to bounce it outside and he's running right into a tackle. The goal line and the most valuable piece to Rachaad White is the receiving work. And for whatever reason, Alexander Madison would continuously get 3-4 receptions a game. And here's Rachaad White, right? And I jokingly say that because we're Vikings fans and we know we've aired our complaints, but there's something to be said there, I think.
No, you don't have to joke because it's true. You're 100% right. Rachaad White is PPR scam Alexander Madison. That's 100% what he is, because the dude can be terribly inefficient. He'll hit 1 good run every 3 games. You'd be like, man, maybe he does have some juice still. But you're right. There's plenty of times where I'm like, especially watching Alexander Madison in Minnesota, it's like all you had to do was cut back, and instead you ran right into the hole that was very clearly not open for you. But the thing about Rachaad White is that he can still catch 5-6 passes a game, which is what makes him still so intriguing. But man, if you're not going to hit the end zone, and you're only going to get six attempts for 17 yards, I mean, we're talking about like an Antonio Gibson kind of player, right? When he was still in Washington, where it's like ton of receiving work, but that when those 5-6 rush attempts aren't going anywhere, all you're good for is, the 5 receptions for 25 yards you're going to get every game and 8.5 fantasy points, which at the end of the day doesn't really make you a top 25 running back. Barely makes you a top 30 running back, depending on the week, which is the direction we're starting to head with Rachaad White, especially if Bucky Irving is going to continue to be as efficient as he is and continue to take rush attempts from Rachaad White. Fellas, for these last 3, this is going to be a bigger conversation than these 3 players. Let me rephrase. This conversation has to do with an overall fantasy football strategy that is bigger than just these 3 players. because tight ends have been horrendous in fantasy football this year. They have been terrible. I mean, I looked at the tight end finishes for week 3 last week. Tell me why there are 2 Tennessee tight ends finished inside of the top 10 tight ends this past week. I get Jack Wiley. Is that what his name is? Josh Wiley. I don't even know his first name. Josh Wiley, the tight end 8 with 8.3 fantasy points. And then Nick Vanette. Can we need we need the who players of the week. Why are these dudes why are these dudes the tight end 7 and the tight end 8 on the week? Nick Vanette just caught a touchdown. That's all he did. He didn't do anything else. So let's talk about Mark Andrews, who gave you a goose egg this week. This is awful. I don't know what the people did with Mark Andrews. I don't know what the Ravens did with him. They stole him and shipped him off to a foreign country because this is not Mark Andrews. Mark Andrews does not lose snaps to the third string tight end. He does not. This is red alert. I'm done. I'm out on Mark Andrews. If I got him, I'm shipping him off for whatever bag of chips I can get. Where are you at, Cameron? I mean, the panic meter is at 90, basically 95%.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. What he didn't even play snaps this game. He played 21 snaps? Or was it 21 or 13? I don't remember which one it was, but it was 30% of the snaps in this game. That is what he played. I have no excuse for Mark Andrews. I have no idea what's going on in Baltimore right now. It was kind of this thing of just be patient. He's coming back up the car accident. He's going to be fine. And this last week, he was almost the third most played tight end on their own team. And I have no idea what they're going to do with him moving forward. Yeah, I'm about as completely panicked on a top 5 round pick that you can possibly be.
Here we go. The snap counts from last week. Isaiah Likely, 39, ran 11 routes. Charlie Kohler. There we go. We'll throw him in with the two who's his face Tennessee tight ends for who?
Nick
player of the week.
Nick Vanette and Josh Wiley.
There it is. Thank you. Yeah, the 2 dudes whose names I can't even remember. Played 26 snaps, ran 3 routes, drew a target. Mark Andrews, 21 snaps, 6 routes run, 1 target on the afternoon. It doesn't make any sense. I don't completely understand it. Now, Ty, I know you brought up in the group chat, you shared Nathan Yonke's article that he does every week. He charts all of these snaps in each and every single game. His work is absolutely phenomenal. I cannot give it enough credit. It is a regular staple in my Monday mornings. It was one of my first reads. You mentioned some tidbits from that article that were prevalent, but I also think make this almost worse for Mark Andrews.
I will just say this. I am a full-blown panic. I'm at 100% because it is not a coincidence that Mark Andrews his snaps have been going down and Derrick Henry's carries have been going up. 59 snaps in week 1, 59 in week 1, 41 in week 2, 21 in week 3. Derrick Henry's carries 13 in week 1, 18 in week 2, 25 in week 3. For whatever reason, Andrews is not on the field when the game script is going to favor Derrick Henry. And we may have mentioned this once or twice. I bet other people have heard other people say this, that the Chiefs will do whatever they can to preserve Travis Kelce to the playoffs and stuff. Feels like Mark Andrews is getting that Travis Kelce treatment more than Travis Kelce himself. I don't know. There's no way that Andrews can be in your lineups moving forward because there is no way to predict when Andrews is going to be on the field. And you look at their upcoming schedules, Buffalo, Cincinnati, Washington, Tampa Bay, Cleveland, Denver. Why can't those games not be a Derrick Henry game? So I am panicked, as you can tell.
Just to pull that tidbit out of Nathan Yonke's tracking over at PFF. Quote, "This was a nightmare for Mark Andrews fantasy managers. He hasn't played 22 personnel, which is 2 running backs, 2 tight ends, and 1 wide receiver on the field, as Charlie Kohler is the other tight end in that group. The Ravens used 22 personnel on 14 snaps. He had played the clear majority of the team snaps in 11 personnel last week, but lost some of those to Likely. The other big problem is he played 7 of 21 snaps in 21 personnel, 2 running backs, 1 tight end in the first 2 weeks. He didn't play at all in that personnel grouping, which was 16 snaps in this game, and Andrews did not catch his only target, end quote. Full-blown panic on Mark Andrews. There doesn't seem to be an explanation for this. Do you write it up to the car accident at the start of the season? Did they just totally downplay it? And Mark Andrews is there's actually something wrong with him? There is little to no reasoning for this, other than maybe the Ravens are still struggling to find their identity on offense, and they said, well, you know what? We got this behemoth here. Why don't we go ahead and just feed him the ball and put in our best blocking tight ends and see what we can do from here? That's the only thing I can come up with, but man, it makes zero sense for Mark Andrews managers. The other elite tight end. Go ahead, Ty. Yep, chime in. Yep.
2 of the 3 games that Baltimore has played, Dallas and Vegas, are top 3 in points allowed to running backs. So the hope that at least I have is just, wow, we know that Vegas and Dallas are not good against the run, so we are going to run the ball a lot. But again, you just have to look at the upcoming schedule and be like, well, most of these teams, maybe Buffalo is currently 2nd in fantasy points allowed to the position. Like, there are going to be majority of the games the rest of the season are going to be Derrick Henry game scripts, and that just doesn't benefit Mark Andrews.
No, I will say, if you are like, okay, the fellows told me full-blown panic on Mark Andrews, what do I do with him? Do I cut him? Do I trade him? What do I do? I don't think you cut Mark Andrews. But if you're trying to figure out what in the world do I do with him? Do I trade him? Who do I trade him for? You can ask all those kind of questions over in our Discord, where, it's not just us responding to questions. It is a whole, like our entire community is responding to questions. So if you want to join our Discord and be like, y'all, I'm panicked on Mark Andrews just like the rest of y'all. What do I do? What are you all doing? You can get some collective thoughts over in our Discord, which is down in the description of the audio podcast or YouTube video you're listening to. The other elite tight end, Ty, you brought his name up, is Travis Kelce. I mean, it was another disappointing week, right? 5 targets, 4 receptions for 30 yards. I will say, out of the 3 tight ends we're going to talk about, I am still the least panicked on Travis Kelce, but this meter continues to rise, by 20% each week, where in week 1, I'm like, all right, we got to give it a little bit of time, but like, the utilization is concerning. And last week, it's like, okay, a little bit of the same thing and a pretty putrid performance at that. And now it's like, I don't know, tight end 7 fantasy points was a tight end 14 before Monday Night Football. The tight end landscape is that bad where if you're giving me at least 8 to 10 points and you're an elite tight end, I don't know. I'm panicked, but I'm also trying to realize like these dudes have the most likelihood to break fantasy football on a given week. So yes, I'm panicked on Travis Kelce because I had him ranked as my overall tight end 1 coming into the season, and he has given me nowhere close to that value. But at the same time, I do think Kelce is the most likely out of the bunch. I take that back. Trey McBride is, but Kelce is the most likely out of those top 5 guys to bounce back and give me some elite production as the season goes on, especially as they start to ramp him up more for the playoffs. That being said, the panic meter is still at like a 75-80% here. So, Cameron, where do you find yourself on the meter?
I'm probably with the same. It's just those age cliff questions really start creeping in. Is the fall off last season, the start to this season. He's got 69 receiving yards in the entire season.
Yeah,
that's it. That's all he has through 3 games. It's just gross. And we were talking about a little bit before. Patrick Mahomes, before the show, Patrick Mahomes has 1 top 10 finish since week 8 last season at the quarterback position. So it's this Chiefs offense as a whole hasn't been necessarily clicking the same way. I say that and they won a Super Bowl in that time frame, but from a fantasy perspective, they're not quite putting up the same amount of points. And the other thing for me is Rashee Rice has been killing it these last couple of weeks, and he's doing it underneath. That's what worries me is if I'm Patrick Mahomes and I got Rashee Rice winning quickly on these routes, and I know if I throw it to him, he can break it for 30 yards, or I can throw Travis Kelce who's boxing someone out and can fall forward for 8. It's like, I'm probably going to go with Rice over and over and over again until they make me go back to Kelce. I'm not trade Kelce. I'm not cut Kelce. I'm not sit Kelce this week. I think you still start him. It's just, if we see another week or two of this, then yeah, I'm going to be very, very, very panicked.
To make myself feel better about how bad Travis Kelce has been this year, I'm going to remind the people that I brought up Rachaad Rice as a potential league winner on our League Winners podcast before the season started. So, Ty, as you express your concerns around Travis Kelce, I'm going to take a quick victory lap and feel better about myself.
Yeah, because we all need it. I mean, that's how bad the tight end position has been this year. But, you know, with Kelce and just how this Kansas City offense is going to be moving forward without Isaiah Pacheco, there is some hope that, again, more passing volume can kind of solve the whatever funk we're going to call this for that Kelce's in. That being said, though, for a guy like Kelce that's just going to sit underneath everything and is going to play over the middle of the field, like, not much is happening. And again, to your point, Cam, Rachaad Rice, that is the after the catch threat that this offense kind of needs. That teams may or may not be taking away Kelce, but that just leaves Rachaad Rice with everything else that we're walking away after week 3 with Rachaad Rice catching 12 passes, right? So you there is no world where you cannot be panicked or concerned about Kelce, but I think Kelce, in the situation that he's in Kansas City, you can have a little more patience than for a guy like Mark Andrews.
So here's what I'll ask. Out of, I recognize I took a victory lap, and the people on the audio podcast are probably like, "What?" I literally took a victory lap around my room. I realized that didn't pan out well. Yeah, audio people, YouTube people are like, "Oh, what a dummy! He's just running around his room in a circle." If you were to choose one of these top 5 guys, Sam LaPorta, Mark Andrews, Travis Kelce, Trey McBride, Dalton Kincaid, to have 1 week, because I mean, we could we're not going to talk about Dalton Kincaid or Trey McBride, but like also guys you could throw into this category. If you're going to pick one of those guys to just have 1 week, and then all your concerns are eased, right? Because it feels like that's what we're waiting for. We're waiting for the 1 week where it's like, okay, I can breathe a sigh of relief here. Which tight end do you feel like is most likely to do that? And you know what? I am going to remove Trey McBride from the conversation because he did have his week 2, even though it was like the flukiest of all flukes that he actually put up a fantasy relevant week. If you're going to choose one of those 4 guys that you drafted early to be this elite advantage, which one are you like putting the most faith into to have that 1 week?
Kyle Pitts. No.
Jake Ferguson.
Honestly. Hey, Ferkie's been great, man. Week 1 was nice. When he's healthy, he's great. He might end up being. I remember after week 1, you know, when both Fergie and Njoku got hurt, Hayden Winks over at Underdog was like, honestly, they were looking like the 2 best tight end picks.
Yeah.
Because these other elite tight ends were booty, but here's Jake Ferguson and David Njoku, catching 5-6 passes each and going for 60, 70 yards when the tight end landscape is putrid. So yeah, I honestly, late round, mid late round tight end was probably the move this year instead of elite tight end. We'll take the L on that one. But since we're talking about the elite tight ends, which one are you taking to have that 1 week that just calms all your fears and you feel better in the meantime? It's like your 1 week coping mechanism.
Yeah, I told you guys before too. Like this is the first year I'm all in on the elite tight end. And they all suck. Like it's not even. I picked all of them. I've been take Gerald Everett, and then this year I'm like, nah, we're going elite tight end. They all suck. But I think for me it's Dalton Kincaid because that team is just so in need of a receiving weapon right now. They need somebody who can, be Josh Allen's number 1 moving forward. I think it would be LaPorta, but that sprained ankle that he's got worries me a little bit now that he's coming off a hamstring injury, right? I just think he's going to be banged up, and I don't want to try and put some faith in that. So I'm going to say Dalton Kincaid just for the reason that the Bills need a number 1 option.
And Dalton Kincaid could be that guy after Monday Night Football. We will see. By the time you hear this episode, maybe
this could be really bad. This could be really bad. He could put up another goose egg, and they're like, "This guy's an idiot." But I think season long, right? We're not talking week 3. Season long, I think the guy I'd put my faith in.
They're going to listen to this first thing tomorrow. But God, what an idiot.
I
Dude,
know.
dude put up a Mark Andrews week. Ty, what about you? Who's your choice?
Man, kind of lean Kincaid as well. So if Cam goes down, I'm going down too. The thing with Kelce is that, like, again, if he has a spike week where he finishes as the tight end 1 on the week, it wouldn't necessarily like surprise me because like it could be 3 goal line touchdowns on like 2 shovel passes and then like a end around to Kelce, right? Like that's within the realm of possibility for the Chiefs. LaPorta with the injuries and stuff. And I think if he were to succeed, it's coming at the detriment of somebody else in that offense where they seem very, very set on running the ball with Montgomery, getting Gibbs involved in the passing game, but then Jameson Williams and Amon-Ra, right? Where like LaPorta is kind of fighting for the third option in that offense at this point. So if LaPorta succeeds, it's at the detriment of somebody else. Versus Kincaid, it's like, gosh, that's what we've been kind of like wanting and expecting because there's no one in Buffalo. So it almost the exact same argument that Cam made for Kincaid, but that makes 2 peas in a pod that we're both going down after Monday night.
I won't be joining you in that pod. I still think it's Travis Kelce. I'm just too much of a believer in this Kansas City Chiefs offense that they can't figure it out, that they can't get it right. That, yeah, it might come at the expense of Rachaad Rice, but does Rachaad Rice really need 15 targets every week?
Yes.
Can 5 of those? I mean, he could, honestly. But could he and Kelce have 8 and 10 targets respectively, and you can flip flop those every single week? You could. I think there's a world where Kelce starts to bounce back. He starts to hit the end zone. That's more of a gut take than it is a maybe more plausible, likely outcome take like yours is, where somebody needs to do something in Buffalo. It might as well be Dalton Kincaid. The one guy we didn't choose, though, is Sam LaPorta. You both brought him up in your arguments of, if it weren't for the injury, maybe I would choose him. I am more panicked on Sam LaPorta than I am Travis Kelce. What about you two? Cameron, I'll start with you. Which one are you more panicked on, and where do you put yourself with Sam LaPorta?
I think if he's able to come back healthy quickly, it'll depend on this injury news. If they're saying he's going to be back out there, I think I'm the least out of the 3 we're talking about, least panicked on Sam LaPorta. I really do. I think he's young enough. I think they were trying to start to get him a little more utilized before he got hurt last week, that I'd be less. But if they come out and say he's going to miss 3 weeks, then obviously, that increases the panic meter. But then it's just like, is he 100% healthy after those 3 weeks?
Right.
There's just so many more questions around LaPorta right now because of this ankle injury that I think if I had to pick in this moment, I'm taking Kelce over LaPorta. But if we hear LaPorta's going to be back, maybe misses 1 week, I'll take LaPorta over Kelce right now.
Is it primarily the injury for you as well, Ty? Or would you actually prefer Sam LaPorta over Travis Kelce?
No, I am more panicked on LaPorta than I am on Kelce. I think Dan Campbell said that LaPorta was day to day, so I'm not really like taking the injury into account here with LaPorta. Sure. But again, kind of similar to what I had said with Kincaid, the whole Kincaid argument that I made. With like, if LaPorta is going to succeed, it's at the detriment of somebody else. And while that is certainly plausible, I just look at Kelce in Kansas City where I'm like, well, I know that Pacheco's already out. Like they've already gone through somebody being removed from the picture. So neither, maybe the best way to say it is this, like neither are great options. Neither I have a ton of faith in, but at least I can see a path for Kelce more than I can with LaPorta.
Are you willing to take a chance and buy low on it, either of these guys? Mark Andrews, we're all like, don't want to touch him with a 10-foot pole. There's enough there to be concerned about. Kelce and LaPorta seem like the two where if you're going to go out and take a swing on one of these 3 guys, again, removing Trey McBride out of the picture, because I don't think the Trey McBride manager is panicked enough after his 1 good week. Are you willing to go out and take a stab on one of these 3 guys and buy low on them? Kincaid, LaPorta, or Kelce?
I think I am. if I can move my current tight end to go do it, just because tight ends are so brutal that I'd rather take, the chance on a guy that can get me 15 points a week down the road, even if it takes him a little bit to get there, than just stick with my guy who's getting me 8 points and finishes the top tight end. I don't really care if I get 8 or 5 for my tight end position. I'd rather have the upside. So I think I'm willing on LaPorta and Kelce to take that shot. I would be willing to pay more for LaPorta than I would for Kelce at this point.
What about you, Ty?
I would throw an offer on Kelce. But the other piece of this is that if you're looking long term, you're looking playoffs. By the time that happens, Pacheco's back, and that offense is right. So there's future long term question marks with a guy like Kelce than with LaPorta, where in some weird way you can say in the long term you know what you're going to get with LaPorta, even if this kind of unfortunate streak that he's on continues. You know what you're going to get, and the opportunity is really there for both of them, right? It's that like hypothetical opportunity is still there. So I think right now it's Kelce, but at the same time, maybe it's worth throwing just an offer at both, but you got to be careful not to overpay, because if you do, they can make you look like a fool.
We're going to use the Dallas Goedert barometer after his explosive week in week 3. Would you trade Dallas
Thanks
Goedert?
for bringing it up. I get it. He's my sit of the week. You guys are just like, hey, Cameron picked the sit of the week. That's screwed him. Hey, let's talk about him next week. Gosh, you guys are brutal.
I didn't even mention it. You put that upon yourself. I just mentioned that he had an explosive week. That's all I said. I wasn't going to mention
the week of the year at the tight end position. That's just ridiculous. Unreal.
The Dallas Goedert barometer. Would you trade Dallas Goedert for either of them?
Yes, in a heartbeat.
Yeah. Well, because here's the real question that I think is what we should be talking about. Can you get LaPorta plus for Goddard right now? Can you get a Kelce plus for Goddard?
No.
No.
It would have to be a 1-for-1 swap. You'd have to do like a cute little wide receiver mix in there too, probably, but you definitely could not do a 2-for-1 where Sam LaPorta is on the 2 side. Maybe, depending on if Dallas Goedert still balls out. Which, I mean, the reason why I asked that too is, you're without A.J. Brown probably, and Devonta Smith is in concussion protocol. So Devonta Smith might be out this next week. So Dallas Goedert might be by himself. It might be him and Saquon Barkley for the Eagles.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think in the short term, I think Goddard could be a great play. And I think that's not bad if you want to make sure you win the next 2 weeks. But if I'm thinking about fantasy football, I don't really care if I win week 4 or 5 compared to if I win week 14, 15, 16, 17. So that's at least my mindset if I'm trading for LaPorta or Kelce.
We'll put a bow on it there. We could sit here and debate these elite tight ends until the sun goes down. The matter of fact is that this was not the year to be in an elite tight end. There is still a lot of season left, though. We're through 3 weeks. This is a 17-week game we play. That being said, we have to start forming opinions on these guys sooner rather than later. Try and make trades that are going to benefit our teams for the rest of the season. So again, I mentioned the Discord earlier. That is one of the best places you can do that, where you can just troubleshoot with our community. We hop in and answer questions every once in a while as well. You can find that down in the description of the audio podcast or YouTube video you are listening to. You can follow our socials as well. I am at Lucas Wenzel on Twitter, CamLaw FFF for Cameron, Tyler_Plath for Tyler. The main socials, though, for the fellas specifically, where you get all of our content. FF Fellas on Twitter, the FF Fellas on Instagram, Fantasy Football Fellas, Facebook, and TikTok. We'll be back again this week. Cam and Ty will be back with a Trade Targets episode tomorrow. We'll be back on Thursday then with a little bit of a start-sit action, make or break for week 4 of Fantasy Football. Until then, make sure you're subscribed, turn on those notifications so you know when those episodes go up. We'll see you all next time. Deuces.
Deuces.